Perfect World Episode 217. After Shi Hao returned to the underground city, he was maliciously targeted by Jada from Limitless Heaven. Picking up from the last episode, Shi Hao was taken by the mother of all things Chi Cauldron to the spatial node they had once stopped at. However, during this process, that cauldron seemed to be severing karma, obliterating Shi Hao, and erasing all traces of his journey to the other side. But ultimately, that cauldron only destroyed the spatial node and didn't make Shi Hao truly forget that experience. This heaven-defying method made Shi Hao break out in a cold sweat. He even began to doubt if a person's life could be rewritten. Shi Hao. In the unknown historical ages, has someone truly done this, wiping away certain memories from a person's mind? If this were truly the case, then wouldn't the person involved be living in a world rewritten Shi Hao by others? Of course, this wasn't just Shi Hao's random speculation. After seeing that immortal mountain, he thought of many things. The beings of that entire world all believed the 9 heavens Shi Hao Earths were demons that invaded their homeland, completely rejecting the notion that the Immortal Valley era was buried. Perhaps the beings of that world also had their memories severed back then and were instilled with terrifying thoughts. A life like this is terrifying to even think about. Just as Shi Hao was lost in thought, that cauldron shook violently, shattering the void, and sent Shi Hao to the real world. And before leaving, the mother Chi Cauldron of all things also said goodbye to Shi Hao. Upon hearing this, Shi Hao had a hunch that when they met again, it would be who knows when. Perhaps it would be millennia or even eons. Finally, Shi Hao also simply replied with the word goodbye. However, he felt somewhat dazed. Everything he had experienced felt unreal. Moreover, Shi Hao felt that the word goodbye wasn't lighthearted. The more he understood, the heavier his responsibility would become. Of course, the so-called Great Era was also about to begin, and the Great Tribulation was already destined. What worried Shi Hao was how strong those immortals truly were, and who would be able to resist them then. You must know it was they who once caused the entire ancient era to be buried. Therefore, Shi Hao could only pray that the immortals of this generation are descendants of those people from back then. Otherwise, if they are still the enemies from the previous era, it's terrifying to even think about. After all, a long time has passed and their cultivation must have surely advanced, reaching an even more terrifying height. Soon, Shi Hao returned to a certain location within the underground city. However, several months had passed, and the 3 supreme beings had long ago taken the others to the Heavenly God Academy. Shi Hao felt a great pity. He knew that he had most likely already missed the opportunity to enter the Heavenly God Academy. After all, he had inexplicably disappeared for several months, and no one else would wait for him again. However, Shi Hao's top priority was still to get out of this area. Otherwise, he would likely be trapped and die here. But suddenly, a powerful divine sense swept over from the void, instantly blasting Shi Hao flying. His face turned pale, as if struck by a massive force. The pain in his body was bearable, but Shi Hao's spiritual consciousness was nearly shattered. That person struck very ruthlessly. Even Shi Hao, who now stands at the peak of heavenly gods, was no match before such a figure. Immediately after, a man in a gray robe walked over. He looked very young, but his eyes were very profound, as if he had lived for long ages. Then he opened his mouth and asked Shi Hao, "Where have you been these past few months?" This person didn't ask about his origin or name, clearly knowing Shi Hao's identity. Shi Hao replied that he had entered a gray space. However, the person who came seemed unfriendly towards Shi Hao. He coldly said, "Although this place isn't the central area of the underground city, but merely a desolate land in the outer city, with your strength, how could you open up a space?" Upon hearing this, Shi Hao felt a surge of anger. He had just emerged and was heavily injured by this person, and now he was still being relentlessly pressured. So he retorted, "Then, senior, where do you think I should be?" After a moment of silence, the gray-robed man continued to press, "Then why are you only returning now?" Shi Hao could understand this person's insurheation. After all, This was the underground city, an important place guarding the frontier. So he calmly replied, I was unable to escape from that space until that space was inexplicably opened, and I only appeared here. However, this person didn't believe him at all and was about to forcibly search Shi Hao's sea of consciousness to find out the truth. Shi Hao was instantly enraged. How could anyone do such a thing? For cultivators, unless they are enemies, there would absolutely never be talk of searching the sea of consciousness. Because this is not only a defeat, but even more it is a humiliation. Then Shi Hao spoke up and said, Senior, we are not enemies. Your actions are equivalent to humiliating me. But the gray-robed man completely ignored him, presuming upon his cultivation being higher than Shi Hao's, and coldly said to him, What is there about you that is worth me humiliating? Shi Hao did not speak. It had come to this point. What else was there to say? This person was clearly deliberately targeting him. At the same time, Shi Hao also didn't expect that such a person would be waiting for him here. You must know that anyone who can appear here is not an ordinary powerhouse. Although Shi Hao had already prepared for the worst, perhaps he would fall here today, he still said unwillingly, The Great Tribulation is imminent. You and I are both people of this realm. We can't be considered mortal enemies. And your actions are truly humiliating me. Therefore, I will absolutely not compromise. After hearing this, the gray-robed man decided to stop talking nonsense and extra-hotted a finger, pointing it directly towards Shi Hao's glabella. In the next moment, Shi Hao's forehead felt like it was splitting, his spiritual consciousness about to collapse. All he could do now was fight with all his might, even if he were to be shattered to pieces. Because if a real enemy did this to him, Shi Hao would have nothing to say. But this powerful figure was clearly one of his own. Therefore, at this moment, this person was already an enemy in Shi Hao's eyes. Even if the other party played a relevant role in the future Great Tribulation and was one of the guardians of the Imperial City, he wouldn't acknowledge it. Then, Shi Hao endured the excruciating pain, and the Lightning Emperor armor inscription appeared on his body. His left hand held the myriad spirits painting, his right hand sent out the reverse dragon scale, resisting the immense pressure with all his might, just to prevent the other party from forcibly searching his soul. However, this time, unexpectedly, the Lightning Emperor armor inscription took effect first. It shone with myriad divine lights, clanging loudly. The originally rust-covered armor inscription now underwent an astonishing change. When the gray-robed man saw this, his expression turned grave. Clearly, he also recognized the Lightning Emperor armor inscription. Originally, his finger was gradually approaching Shi Hao's forehead, but it was repeatedly stopped. The gray-robed man said coldly, I hate being constrained by others. This battlesuit is indeed extraordinary, possessing endless glory and legend, but using it against me is a wrong choice. I will not hold back. Soon, his long finger descended again. The immense pressure was terrifying to the extreme. At this moment, Shi Hao was burning with rage. He was clearly the victim, yet the other party was so unscrupulous. As that armor inscription made cracking sounds, emitting a crimson sacred glow, it temporarily blocked that finger again. However, the Lightning Emperor armor inscription was, after all, a damaged armor. The holes on it were fatal flaws. Therefore, under the gray-robed man's renewed pressure from his finger, he was about to extract Shi Hao's memories through the holes. However, an accident happened again. The holes on the armor inscription transformed into terrifying vortices, violently impacting outwards. And at this time, the color of the armor inscription also gradually transformed from a brilliant light to a terrifying black. The powerful aura it released swept in all directions. The gray-robed man's finger was also finally completely blocked by the black armor inscription, unable to advance even half a step. At the same time, someone in the distance, after seeing this scene, clenched his fists and said angrily, the Lightning Emperor's battlesuit has turned to darkness once again, forced to this extra hout. Then he threw a punch, directly attacking the gray-robed man. At this time, the gray-robed man hesitated slightly and could only withdraw his hand, letting go of Shi Hao to counter the sudden attack. As the two clashed, sparks flew and runes shot into the sky. If Shi Hao hadn't been protected by the Lightning Emperor's battlesuit, he probably would have been shattered by the shockwaves of their battle. And as the two fought, the originally dim sky in this place was instantly illuminated. The white bones on the ground also instantly turned into dust, scattering in the air like snowflakes. Then, the other person swept with a large sleeve, helping Shi Hao resolve the crisis, fearing he would be shattered in the waves of this battle. The gray-robed man, seeing this, said with a complicated expression, "He has the Lightning Emperor's battlesuit. He won't die." The newcomer berated, "You have the nerve to mention the Lightning Emperor's battlesuit? Haven't you seen it's as black as ink? Now it has appeared in the underground city again. You want to make him fall into darkness, don't you?" Unexpectedly, as soon as the newcomer finished speaking, the Lightning Emperor's battlesuit seemed to be stimulated. At this moment, not only did it release an immense aura, protecting Shi Hao, but there was also a dark power eroding his body. Finally, Shi Hao couldn't help but let out a long roar and punched towards the gray-robed man. Clearly, the anger in Shi Hao's heart had merged with the resentment of the Lightning Emperor's battlesuit. The gray-robed man's eyes were cold and sharp, and he raised his hand to meet the attack. But the other person also moved to block and shouted loudly, "Do you want to completely make the Lightning Emperor's battlesuit fall into darkness?" The gray-robed man replied, "Did you see that? A junior who doesn't even qualify to enter the underground city dares to attack me. How can I not punish him?" At this time, although his fist was blocked, his body burst forth with sheets of ancient runes, rushing towards Shi Hao. Shi Hao's battle blood instantly boiled, and the Lightning Emperor's battlesuit also turned as black as ink, appearing even more terrifying. However, in the face of such a powerful impact, Shi Hao forcefully blocked the other party's bone runes. Upon seeing this, the other person frantically attacked the gray-robed man and continued to berate. Back then, it was because of a great injustice in the underground city that the Lightning Emperor's battlesuits became indignant and nearly fell into darkness. And now, if because of your single-mindedness, you force the battlesuit to turn into dark divine armor again and take away a genius, can you bear such responsibility? Immediately after, the two fought fiercely again. Although Shi Hao's body was eroded by the dark aura, he was not seriously injured. He could even hear their conversation. Shi Hao realized that something similar to his situation might have happened back then. Some people were repeatedly wronged, causing the Lightning Emperor's battlesuit to completely turn black and wander outside. At this time, the gray-robed man spoke, "He's just a minor cultivator. As long as we capture him, and then together we commemorate the battlesuit, we can solve all the trouble." The other person replied, "Jada, don't be so obstinate. If something goes wrong, you can't bear the responsibility." The gray-robed man continued, "What is there that I can't bear? Isn't he just a junior from the sacred foundation? If it were a great emperor descending, I would acknowledge it." The other person berated, "Jada, there's a problem with your Dao heart. You actually lost your composure over some external things. This is a precursor to Qi deviation. And your disciple from limitless heaven, wasn't he suppressed by the youth before you? Are you intentionally targeting him?" However, the gray-robed man completely ignored him and even used his status to say that Shi Hao had disappeared for several months and must be strictly investigated. As the two continued to clash, this area never dimmed. But at this moment, another powerful figure arrived from a distance and berated, "You two fighting like this, don't you feel shame and remorse? The great battle hasn't even begun, and you're already killing each other. Return to the city quickly." It was obvious that the powerful figure who questioned had a higher status than the two, making the gray-robed man very wary. The battle between the two thus stopped. And Jada said nothing, glanced at Shi Hao, then turned and rushed towards the core of the underground city. while the other person brought Shi Hao along with him. The interior of the underground city was vast and boundless. If an ordinary expert entered, it would be like traversing the heavens. However, Shi Hao was in no mood to marvel at it now. He had been maliciously targeted by Jada, and there was always a fire of anger and frustration in his heart. The other party was purely bullying him with power. It was simply a blatant insult. And this time, it took Shi Hao and the others quite some effort to enter the city. Jiade and the other person simultaneously sent out a plaque, which merged together, transforming into a platform. Only then did they teleport to the core of the underground city. When Shi Hao entered the core of the underground city, he only then realized it was the place where the ancient covenant was to be signed. In fact, the outside world had always been unaware of how many experts remained in the inner city, or whether ancient, peerless figures still survived. And today, Shi Hao was fortunate enough to step into this area, entirely because the great figures inside allowed him to enter. This city was truly too large. Standing here, Shi Hao felt like an ant, unable to see the magnificent wonders of the city clearly. Only by opening his heavenly eye could he see a corner of the place. But even so, this place remained silent, like a dead city, unable to see any of the supreme experts in the underground city. Shi Hao was very puzzled. Where was the old heavenly human Yi Qi Xian of the heavenly human race now? But suddenly, someone by the roadside spoke. "He's here." Shi Hao looked closely and found that on a dim boulder, an old man was sitting cross-legged. And looking into the distance, some were sitting cross-legged on large stars, while others were sitting on blue stones. Each of them seemed to have passed away, without a trace of life. And the clothes on these people were very ancient, and their races were also different. Especially, some people were covered in dust. It was unknown for how many Shi Haos of thousands of years they hadn't moved and had merged with the ground. After seeing these sights, Shi Hao felt as if he had opened an ancient scroll. A heavy sense of history washed over him. At this time, the old man who spoke earlier spoke again. "The Lightning Emperor armor inscription has returned once more, but why is it approaching darkness?" His language was a very peculiar ancient tongue. Although Shi Hao didn't understand it, his spiritual consciousness could comprehend its meaning. Only at this moment did Shi Hao understand that this underground city was of immense importance. Other ancient realms within the 9 heavens Shi Hao Earths had probably all dispatched some of their strongest experts to garrison here.